Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is the 9th and final panel discussion of the Greenlight Climate Festival. My name is John O'Sullivan, and I'll be moderating today's discussion around, innovative funding mechanisms for conservation, primarily through blockchain, and this brand new word we've all been hearing called NFTs. So, we're going to explore this power and how it can, help fund, measure, and elevate the profile of animal and environmental conservation around the world. So I'm not going to delve too deeply into the profiles of these folks because nobody can tell their story better than them. But today we're joined by Emmy Award-winning photographer and anthropologist Josh Cogan, founder of East Africa's first indigenous-owned and operated nature conservancy, Nelson Reiyia, communities and development and innovation lead for WWF Romania, Oana Mondoc, and finally head of business development for Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique, Eric Wilburn. So today, through the lens of these various conservation organizations and leaders in the space, we're going to delve into the possibilities that distributed ledger technology, and particularly NFTs, can bring to their respective projects. So I'll start briefly by introducing myself and Project Ark, which is a new project by Carbonbase, which is kind of how all of us came to know each other here on stage. And I'll start by talking about President Jimmy Carter once said, like music and art, love of nature is a common language that can transcend political or social boundaries. In a Carbonbase, that's something that we really share in that belief in the power of art and the idea that protecting our natural world is something that we can all value. So we've created Project Ark in collaboration with the World Wildlife Fund and their Panda Labs division. And they actually, disrupt business as usual practices via collaborations that foster environmental innovation around the world. Now, what Project Ark is a carbon neutral marketplace for rare digital collectibles known as non-fungible tokens or NFTs, basically any type of digital collectible or art, and these are encoded onto the blockchain. And these can directly fund animal and environmental conservation efforts around the globe. So our mission is to revolutionize how fundraising for these efforts can take place in the world. And we want to pioneer new forms of collective governance in the fight to protect our earth and its species. And the way that we're doing this is by providing a platform to connect passionate artists who create these digital NFTs with purpose-driven collectors. And ultimately, portions of these proceeds will go to support international NGOs and local communities that are making a real impact on the ground. Project Ark, we're hoping will become a home for creative artists of all mediums to, sell their work, know that they're making a difference in the process. Buyers of these rare collectible NFTs will be able to know exactly where the money that they spend goes. Right on the blockchain, everything's transparent, goes directly into the pockets of the projects on the ground, and ultimately the impact that it creates. And so most importantly, though, these vital organizations around the world will not only be able to access new funding, but they're able to spread the word of their impact even further. They're able to elevate their stories through art. And essentially, we're trying to create a win-win-win scenario for all three of these key stakeholders. So, while this is just the beginning for Project Ark, we have over 100 NFT artists committed to our conservation mission. We've got multiple conservation projects and organizations around the world ready to partner with us on our next campaigns, some of which will be organizations on this stage. And we'll be bringing to life the incredible importance of their work through a wide range of immersive art experiences. So for our very first campaign, we'll actually be supporting the ongoing conservation efforts of WWF Romania. And I'll start by asking Oana to sort of tell us a bit about that project, the challenges they're facing, and the solutions that they're developing on the ground. So go ahead, Oana.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, John. Saying good evening from Romania. This is a place in Europe which is in the central eastern part of Europe, and it's still one of those wild pockets of nature that has an immense ability to contribute to the challenges that we're facing globally. So as you might have heard throughout the conference today and throughout your lives, wild places and biodiverse areas are a key to our survival as a species. They offer those services such as the air that we breathe and the waters that we drink and the quality of the soil that provides our food. And those places, large landscapes and wild landscapes, the biodiversity that hosts them are basically nature's ability to heal and protect us and the planet for the future. So throughout the world, not just in the great Amazon, there are such pockets, and probably even close to your home. And this is the reason why 7 years ago, after a journey of working in campaigning in the UK for WWF, I was pulled back to my roots. So this is Romania, and really wanted to be closer to those people that we were advocating for or fundraising for in a sort of main stage, such as was London or the UK. And I wanted to be close to the rangers because I was realizing that it's those people on the front lines that are really the holders, the rightful holders of those assets and of those natural values that that are basically our planetary common good. So if the people who are on the front lines, if the people who own the lands where biodiversity is still high and who live there every day, who feel the pressures of all sorts, economic primarily, if they are not well off, if they are not part of the solution, then all of the money that we could fundraise on a global stage like London or wherever else in the world doesn't make any difference if that money doesn't get to them. So this was sort of the driver for me to come back to the Carpathian Mountains, and 80% of my time I'm based in a mountainous village in the southwest of Romania, where there are bears and wolves and lynx, but also very recently, 7 years ago, we've been rewilding bison. Bison are a large herbivore which have a great impact in the ecosystem, and basically they make the ecosystem wholer and help nature to restart certain processes that are not working at their best. Now, bison are great. They help nature be more biodiverse, and they help pasture biodiversity. And of course, they have a direct impact on the insects and the birds and whatnot. And you know, that diversity then has an impact on the soil, and that soil has an impact on the food that we eat. But really, the pressure that has had these bison disappear or has had other species lose ground is the pressures that us humans put on these wild places. So the people who live in those areas need to have equal benefits or you know, worthy benefits of those assets that they govern. So the project that we are working on is very complex. It's really trying to create a model for socioeconomic balance and a social economy that is designed or that is inspired by this wild nature. But until you end up building, you know, green enterprises and so on, there are a lot of behaviors and, you know, really ingrained behaviors in the people there that we need to work with. So what brought us together with Project Ark is a work that's 2 years old, where hunters, which you'd say probably are some, you know, a category of people that are opposed or are against the well-being of wildlife, they are not. They are, you know, they are hunting because they've inherited this kind of practice and this kind of habit, and they're not doing it very well due to the fact that we live in a fairly corrupt society, due to the fact that their families are not necessarily well off. They have a lot of other things to worry about than the balance in nature, and they hunt for all sorts of reasons, but they don't do it out of the fact that they are evil or anything like that. So we need to sort of understand what's the source of the over harvesting that they do, and if that source is something that can be counteracted with other benefits, that is our intervention. So we're working with hunters in trying to create a common wildlife management approach, which is an informal one, a voluntary one, and a sort of unification around this idea of the common good. So we're basically working to incentivize positive behavior. So trying to help them to understand, to jointly and have a shared knowledge about this biodiverse ecosystem and the values that they are creating through good management to the wider society. And how do you sort of break that to them? It's not through conversation and education, because they're, you know, adults who are really hard to educate at this point. So we're using incentives and rewards to sort of work on the psychology and create a context for collaboration. So we are rewarding good hunting behavior, and have tested this in an analog way, basically setting a challenge of no hunting to confirm that there is no poaching happening at a time where animals are giving birth, which is a very important time for the new generation of wildlife. And in exchange for not hunting in that crucial period, they would receive small rewards. Now, in addition to these small rewards, the most valuable thing that we've done together in doing that is the fact that we spend the entire month doing wildlife monitoring together to really unlock some of these things that we know from science. WF scientists know these things, but they are, just telling this information, telling the science doesn't really convince people. If they are part of the data gathering, if they are there having those conversations with you, that is the moment in time where you generate shared knowledge. And suddenly, basically you build the relationships, you have those conversations about what's really happening, what's really valuable here, and how do you sort of lure that first, break that ice, is through providing these small rewards, which they actually use for other things that they care about, their families, giving some sort of small incentives to their kids to do, I don't know what thing. So they have some needs. If we can meet those needs by diverting benefits from, the global population, which cares about these places, to those people who have their hand on the chainsaw, or who have their hand on the gun, or who have their hand on, a certain type of tractor, or, a certain type of tool to do more traditional and ecological agriculture, that is an area where money can really make an impact. If people who govern those lands get more benefits, or, more benefits than a lot of intermediaries, and this is, I think, where blockchain will be playing a key role in the future. Really connecting the people who make the most impact in conservation with the people with payers, or with people who want to have that immense and direct impact without the middlemen, and really sort of proving that work and that impact without without any doubt. So happy to maybe expand on some of these aspects later. I hope that wasn't too much information in a short time, and really looking forward to hear from the other panelists about their work.
Thank you so much, Oana. And I think one of the key concepts here, right, is that conservation is very much a human issue, right? It's not simply, reintroducing animals to the wild. It's not protecting areas. It's getting involved with the communities that live around them, because, unless we are truly stewards of the environment, and we're not, it's often an information gap is what it is, right? It's people don't understand, or they don't have the opportunities. It's a human resources issue. So engaging with these communities in this way and allowing them to have different sort of, revenue sharing and reward systems is certainly something that you've seen success with. And I know that I'll go over to Eric. I know he's right now exploring a lot of different opportunities with blockchain, and ways in which he can benefit the people that, to the tune of 400,000, I think, are residing in the Gorongosa National Park right now in Mozambique. So I'll let Eric take it from there, introduce his work, and talk about very much the same concepts.
Yeah, thanks, John. And Oana, I love that the thread that ties us together is catalyzing a green bioeconomy. I mean, that's the challenge that's in front of us in Gorongosa, bringing 400,000 people out of abject poverty and trying to protect and restore 2.5 million hectares. And a lot of what I work on is how do we get the finances to do that, to support these livelihoods. And I primarily work in the carbon offset space, which there's a lot of talk right now around how blockchain can be used related to carbon offsets. But I'll just kind of maybe plant one seed that there's an international market for carbon right now. There's not an international market for animals and biodiversity in terms of their value, the value of those animals. There's nothing for ecosystem services internationally, like water and soil health and those pieces. So a lot of what I'm curious to learn more about, hopefully from folks on this panel or other folks who are innovating in this space, is how could, is there, and I'm not saying how, is there potential for blockchain and NFTs and these kind of novel democratized mechanisms for capturing value, to capture the value of biodiversity, the value of ecosystem services. So that's a space that I'm really interested in. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other panelists. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Eric. I wanted to, Josh, are you there right now?
I am. Let me just turn
okay,
on my
perfect. So I mean, Eric and Oana, I mean, you guys are leaders on the ground, and you've done some incredible work with these communities. I now wanted to switch over maybe to Josh's experience working, coming in from the, telling the stories of these kinds of projects and telling the stories of these communities on the ground. Josh, you've got an incredible career in the film and photography industry, and so I was just wondering maybe if you could share, what is it like telling the stories of these people, and how do you think that it creates new narratives around what needs to be done?
Well, I think, there's one interesting thing here is that we're talking about a lot of broken systems, right? And I think when we're kind of looking into blockchain technology, we're trying to find new systems. Originally I think that started through finance. That was one of the original drivers, right? But now we're starting to think about how we can apply it to other areas, and particularly as an artist, this is one of the other areas, like artist rights and artist livings have been heavily disrupted by centralization, as has environment and ecology, right? I think, a lot of the storytelling that I've done over the years has been out in places. I've actually been in Gorongosa, Eric, so I spent a lot of time there. And I think in a lot of the people, some of the places that I was looking that you're working are also places that I've seen, but there is a really heavy disconnect, right? There's a heavy disconnect, and there's also a disconnect to how stories are told. People are kind of inundated a little bit with stories. I say that as a photographer, you're always like, how do you actually create meaningful impact? And I've done storytelling all over the world, and you'll affect one person or maybe two, but how do you actually create systems of exchange and systems of interchange between ecosystems, between artists, and between the people that live there? And so one of the things, I don't know if you found this, Eric or Oana, this is something that I was kind of thinking about a lot this past year as I drove across the United States. As you know, we have a very heavy political divide that we've seen here in the United States over the last 4 years, but a growing divide that's happened a long time. And a lot of that is between rural and urban communities. And one of the things that really kind of struck me when I was out there this year is that, I live in Washington, D.C., so kind of like the center of the seat of federal power here. A lot of my friends are change makers in different communities, environmental, social justice, and conservation. But when I was out in land, I happen to be a big fisher, and I've been trying to learn how to hunt too. And what kind of struck me is that whenever I wanted to know something about an environment, how to fish there, how to hunt there, where to hike, how to really understand the place I was in, how to photograph it, I was speaking to people that were politically on the opposite side of the spectrum than me, right? And you speak a little bit about this, like people that are living and subsisting on the land feel very disenfranchised from the decision-making processes around them. You were speaking a little bit about that, Oana. And how do we do that, right? So a lot of the storytelling that I've done as of the last couple of years has been on logging, on old growth logging here in the United States. And these are really complex stories, right? They're really, really complex stories. I was particularly actually working on logging on indigenous lands. And without getting too deep into it, these were lands that are actually controlled by indigenous communities that were leased to logging operations in order to generate revenue for the communities, right? And one of the things I was covering recently was they were giving carbon credits to some of the lands here. This was out in Alaska in the Tongass National Forest in order not to log, right? So then there creates this tension by which the loggers who depend on the trees in order to make a living are no longer making a living. The indigenous community is getting paid finally for resources without destroying them. But there ends up being kind of a disconnect there, because if you look at a lot of loggers, they're not, we tend to kind of demonize them a little bit in the environmental movement and say, oh, well, they're bad people. They're doing what they know how to support their families. It's that simple. And so if we can kind of change the systems to be able to do that, I think also storytelling gives us an opportunity to help us understand people a little bit differently, create systems of interchange that are really meaningful. But before I go too far, I kind of want to step back a little bit, and I can talk a little bit about our project at some point, John, but I don't want to kind of like steal the lens here. I think we can come back to that. But one of the things that I'm really interested in doing, and then I'm hearing you kind of touch into, Eric, and you, Oana, is like, how do we link biological scarcity with digital scarcity, with the blockchain? That to me is like a really interesting possibility that actually kind of fused in my head over the last couple of weeks, and part of what I've been talking to John about. But I think we can come back to that a little bit at the end and maybe introduce that idea and then talk to everyone about it.
I think it's quite telling that, you know, three people from three very different backgrounds and three very different areas and work all have exactly the same threads and the same problems that they're seeing. And it's fascinating, you know, that I feel like we understand the problem. It's coming up with the solutions that, you know, we're just now starting to really develop. And Oana, I know that your work at WWF is pretty innovative and on sort of the front cutting edge of this kind of stuff. So kudos to you for that. But Nelson is another character who I've known and loved now for the last 5 years. He's an absolutely amazing individual who has changed, you know, his community for the better, to say the least. And you know, he's doing these community-led initiatives to empower people to make their own decisions, to, you know, how to move into the future. And you know, Nelson's a part of an indigenous Maasai tribe, and he's just an incredible individual. I'll shut up and let Nelson take the mic. Tell us your story, my friend. You're on mute there, Nelson.
Thank you, John, and a pleasure to join with you. And good evening, everyone from Maasai Mara, Kenya. I'm pleased to be here and to share our story. It's really amazing to be able to join up with you to share experiences. Well, I'm Nelson Reiyia, and I work with the local indigenous Maasai community here in Maasai Mara. So our community has been instrumental in trying to open up space for wildlife, because unfortunately, over the last few years, land here has been commodified and wildlife has been threatened, especially the Great Migration, because there has been a lot of fences, and over time, wildlife could not move through. So our community came together to form the first Maasai-led community conservancy. So it was a very important thing, because for a long time, the local communities were kind of left behind, and most of the conservation endeavors were led by non-local people. And for sustainability to be there, the local communities have to be involved. So, you know, very happy to be able to join you and to share our experience in forming the first Maasai-led conservancy here in Maasai Mara. And very proud to say that last year we won the UNDP Equator Prize 2020 because of our innovative conservation model. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to joining the discussion and taking this forward.
Terrific, guys. I appreciate everyone introducing their work and what they're working on right now. Now, Josh, you mentioned earlier that you were looking to delve a little bit deeper into the thread of tying resource scarcity to digital scarcity, and how we might be able to innovate with the blockchain as to how we can diversify fundraising for these projects and give it to the communities who know what to do best with it. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that.
So, I think one of the things that we kind of see in natural systems, as all of us are kind of studying natural systems and ecology, is that the way kind of current financial structures, power structures, mostly financial structures are all incentivized, is that the wealth tends to be heavily centralized, right? And so everything is going through these like centralized gatekeepers. You see this in media, like the average photographer or storyteller isn't getting paid a lot, but the media organizations are. You see this also in conservation. The people that are asked to take the brunt of conservation are not the people making any money, right? These are even some of my concerns that I'll hold around things like 30 for 30, is it tends to like ban the ability for people that live by the places to be able to live off the land that they're on, right? And so there's a lot of resentment that comes from the rules that they get around that. And so one of the thoughts that have been kind of coming to me recently through a lot of my storytelling is, what if we could really link that biological scarcity to the sense of digital scarcity? So the NFTs, which have kind of like become this phenomena, for everyone nowadays, this idea of these non-fungible tokens, which are an interesting concept, but of course, like, we're early on in the script of what those really mean, right? So there's a lot of kind of silliness in the space, which can get you to look away. One of the more interesting things about them is that if you link that kind of rare idea of kind of a tokenized asset, which is something that you see a lot in carbon credits, but actually link into an incredibly rare species. All right, so one of the projects that I'm working on right now is documenting old growth trees. And old growth trees, particularly in the boreal regions of the Americas and North America, are incredibly rare. There's only 1% of them left, of like the big wood sequoias and redwoods. There's only 1% of them left of an area where 78% of our land mass at some point was covered with forest, but now no more, right? And so these trees are going to be something that are gone. They're going to be completely gone at the rate of logging and habitat loss that we have now. But at the very least, most people are never going to be able to experience these. So if you could actually do digital capture, for me, one of the things that I'm kind of working on a project with John right now is that if we can do digital capture of these places, and one of the things that I'm really particularly interested in as kind of a narrative bent is mother trees. I don't know if anyone is kind of familiar with the concept of like the wood wide web, or the ideas that forests are kind of acting as community-based organisms. They're not individual organisms anymore, that they're communicating through like mycelial networks. And the center of those nodes tend to be things that have been kind of dubbed mother trees. So mother trees is a kind of a really interesting concept, right? That by virtue of age and size, they're linked to far more many trees than anyone else through these mycelial networks in which they're kind of mitigating disease and passing out nutrients. But these mother trees are really, really rare. And these concepts of mother trees also exist within the indigenous communities that steward these lands that are actually under threat. So the thought that I have, and part of the project I'm working on with John, I'm keeping it somewhat close to the vest, is that we're going to do some really kind of immersive digital recording of these mother trees, and then kind of tokenize them and allow people to buy these pieces of work of these mother trees, right? And these are inherently really rare assets, right? Because even if things we're thinking about like white rhinos, where there's one or two that exist, and people talk about digital scarcity on the blockchain, that's not really so interesting to me as like, we have 2 of these animals left, or we have 40 of these trees left. That to me is real rarity, right? And so if we can link those two and get people to invest in protecting these lands, if we can create, using the blockchain to decentralize the cash flows, as opposed to them going through logging companies, actually going directly to loggers or to indigenous communities that are stewarding the land or investing in carbon sequestration that the forests hold, and thereby kind of freeing up the links and decentralizing the nodes of like wealth and resource management, then I think there's a real possibility of using art as an intermediary, or at least as a means to get people to really interact and care about these places or feel invested in them.
Absolutely. And some of the science that, Josh is talking about here, for those who aren't aware or want to check it out, look up fantastic fungi. The way that trees can actually communicate with one another through the fungus in the soil. It's mind blowing. It's fascinating. And it makes you think twice about wanting to snap a branch off a tree. It really, but that's the power of art, right? It tells you a story you didn't know before. But one thing I found interesting in what you said, Josh, was, the indigenous knowledge of these types of things. So I wanted to maybe pose this to both Nelson and Oana, but Nelson, you could start maybe talking about the codification of indigenous knowledge. The fact that there are people out there right now that have information that could, in all likelihood, change our lives, but we just can't get it. We don't, there's language barriers, there's, all these other issues. So how about coding indigenous knowledge, Nelson, with your Stories Cafe that you're building in the Conservancy to share the Maasai culture with the world and Maasai knowledge? If you could elaborate on that. You're on, Nelson. You're on mute again there, buddy.
Yeah, so thank you, John. It's really interesting what Joshua's explaining to us, and how we can leverage on the power of the blockchain, even in what we are trying to achieve here in Masai Mara. So as you know, traditional knowledge systems are facing extinction. And it is our hope that we can be able to revive it so that it doesn't die in our time. So one of the things that we are doing in our community is to come up with an idea of establishing a stories cafe. So the idea of the stories cafe is to capture the knowledge, the deep knowledge of the land, of nature, of the environment generally, from the elders, so that that knowledge can be digitally kept for posterity. So, so we have started not necessarily building a central stories cafe, but we have started informing the youth, going out to the villages with our smartphones and simply asking the elders to tell them a story. And then those stories are recorded. And we are hoping that one day, as we continue expanding the idea, we can be able to store those stories digitally and share them locally and globally. And hopefully the knowledge that we are getting can be able to help us to restore the ecosystem. Because it's very, very important that to be able to, restore the ecosystem, we have to marry both traditional knowledge and modern science. And luckily, there are still many people within the traditional communities, like the Maasai here, that have that traditional knowledge. But then we have to leverage on the power of technology to capture those stories, store them, and share them locally and internationally. So that is the idea and the concept behind our Stories Cafe. So for example, one way we are using those traditional knowledge systems here is through our Grazing for Change strategy, which we are employing in the Conservancy. So the Maasai are traditionally known to practice nomadic pastoralism. And the elders would always have an idea on how the land can be shared with wildlife. So in our Conservancy, for example, we have been practicing grazing for change through rotational grazing. So the elders will sit down under a tree and decide that this week, the cattle will graze on a certain section of the Conservancy. And they would actually follow the herd to ensure that the grass is not depleted, that it's grazed to a certain measure, and then they will leave the area and allow wildlife to come back. And it is really working out very nicely. And we have seen tremendous change because we have seen the return of the wildlife. So in our particular area, it's not a big area, in terms of, is it called Gorongosa? Is it in Mozambique? It's a small area, but a very critical area. And 5 years ago, there was no wildlife, practically speaking. But ever since our elders started to introduce a mixed-use conservation model where people and wildlife are encouraged to cohabit together using the traditional knowledge of the people, we have seen a big and tremendous change, and wildlife has come back. So I think it's very, very important that to go forward in conservation, we must encourage mixed-use conservation models instead of pushing out communities so as to create, wild spaces for tourists, for wildlife, that is doomed to fail. So we have to put communities right at the center of conservation.
That's beautiful, Nelson. I mean, this is exactly what everyone's sort of talking about, this common thread, right? Of creating these kind of communities and networks within the people who live there and know the land best, and also introducing the knowledge that, some of these conservation organizations can bring to them, and finding that balance. And Oana and Eric, I wanted to give you two guys a chance there before we wrap up, just to maybe touch on this thread of how do you find it interacting with these, local communities to have for that trust building process, first of all, and then that knowledge exchange. How do you find it going as of right now in the communities you're involved with?
I'll start just to touch on this point, which means that to build trust, you need time, and you need to really invest in those people, in the people that you're trying to help, maybe. And until you gain that trust, we have no right to really, just pour some money in there. But one point that really I want to sort of leave everybody with is this idea. So, community first, that's great, but I think we need to be really attentive that within communities, there is not necessarily equilibrium. So it's not that you have a central repository of some resources and you expect that those resources are distributed to the most vulnerable. So what's really important as we develop the space of distributing value is that we take care and figure out what is needed, who are the most vulnerable, and have those people be part of the conversation. I think this is showing the respect of the elders as they would have had it because of natural beings, but now we live in a sort of individualistic society, and it's really unlikely that societies on the ground are fair. So if we want to be community first, we really need to have spend that time to understand the situation and try to be distributing these benefits to the most vulnerable, and really also uncover where is the pressure coming from? Where is the pressure on these resources coming from? What are those, those vulnerable spots, things that people need that make them to be more greedy or more corruptible? So you need the trust to be able to spot those things and to have those conversations, but it matters how you distribute those benefits as well.
Yeah, I'll just quickly echo. I completely agree with everything. And then the one other layer I'll add on top of that is land tenure and land ownership. So that's one thing that we're really focused on in Gorongosa. We're in the final stages of creating Mozambique's first ever community conservation area under national legislation, where it actually gives full land tenure ownership right to the communities that are in that region. And it's one of 8 that is in our pipeline right now that we're hoping to expand significantly. And, I guess looping it back to the theme of this conversation, which is blockchain, it's really hard to track who owns what in Mozambique, and especially to Oana's point of ensuring that the wealth is distributed evenly within communities. Is there a role in some of these systems, in some of these new technologies, and ensuring that at least from a land perspective, that wealth is distributed? I think that's an interesting question, but you also have to work within the existing context, which is 90% of our communities don't have electricity. So, we've got a couple hurdles in between here and there, but yeah, I love the ideas.
That's fantastic, guys. We're just before we go here, I wanted to give the opportunity in one of the Q&A questions that came up. It was essentially stipulating, what's the vision for the future of your projects, and what do you think the promises of blockchain and NFTs can hold for your projects? Maybe just a couple of sentences as to what you think this new technology can do to bring more resources, more leverage, more everything to your communities. And we can start with Josh. Go ahead for your project.
I would just say I think it can take away the gatekeepers a little bit and kind of and make sure that resources. I think what we see in nature is that you can't trap energy. It fundamentally is against the rules of nature. Energy can be held and released, but it can't be trapped. That's not how our kind of financial and systems of power work. And I think the blockchain provides that opportunity to decentralized energy and power. And I think we can do that through storytelling, through conservation, through distribution of resources through the blockchain.
Providing more ownership and agency to the people on the ground that need it most. Right on. Eric, maybe you can chime in here now.
Yeah, I'm most curious, and I will say I'm not a technologist at all, so I look at blockchain and NFTs as okay, interesting, but I'm a skeptic for sure. But I think that being said, there is interesting potential to use NFTs to essentially develop an outcomes-based approach to conservation and human development. And if you can, it depends on your monitoring systems on the ground and how effective those are. But if you can capture those in tokens, for example, that then allow you to access more philanthropic money, or in the case of carbon offsets, access a market that you otherwise wouldn't have access to, I think that's interesting. And I will just make a plug here because I saw the question that we definitely need to decarbonize the process of creating, digital tokens and blockchain. And we've seen all the reports on Bitcoin and the energy usage. So I know there are groups working on that, and I hope we continue to get it better and better.
Just to address that one point real quick, there's blockchain is often lumped in with Bitcoin mining and Ethereum. They're two very different beasts. But that being said, for our project at Project Ark, we've calculated that on the absolute top end, we would produce about 30 tons, but we're going to be purchasing 100 tons of gold standard and Verra certified carbon offsets to make sure we're not only neutral, but negative, as well as there's a variety of new technologies that are coming out, which are 99% more sustainable for the blockchain minting process. So, I mean, we're on the cusp of a paradigm shift here, right? And technology is moving at 100 miles an hour. So the solution will come, but it is a very nuanced conversation to have. Nelson, maybe you can chime in here as well. Just we spoke a bit about this. What do you think it can bring to your community?
So the biggest problem and the challenge we have here is the colonial type of conservation narrative, the fortress conservation. And I think blockchain is like a light in a long dark tunnel, because with the possibility of having a huge database, we can be able to decentralize the benefits of conservation, to disintermediate conservation, so that the communities can be able to place their resources without the middle. I mean, their ideas and their philosophies to the outside world without middle people. Like here in Kenya, for example, the big players, the big NGOs will always determine the kind of conservation narrative that you will be allowed to practice. But when smaller organizations like ours have the benefit of blockchain, I believe that will disintermediate conservation, so that middle people are removed, and really community-led conservation can be able to scale up their message to the global audience.
Absolutely, being able to tell your own story through your own lens, and I certainly can appreciate that. And Oana, you're one of the first global conservation groups that kind of took a chance on this idea, and we're going to see how it works out in the coming weeks. But maybe you could just finish us off here.
I'm sure there are many. I think the information bubbles are just too complex, and we're not the first for sure. But what I think is really important and what blockchain can provide in the future is collective decision making on this common good. So this means, the global population who is needing, these global assets and values to remain safe, and local populations who are more better equipped to take care of them. It's connecting these people, connecting all of us, and sort of mutually exchanging and deciding and joining forces in a way to keep things in balance. So I think decision making and this governance piece is really important. And I hope that we reach a moment in which this actually can be true and in equilibrium in a way.
And that's one thing we hadn't really touched on too much, but these decentralized tokenization for decision making. If we were to create large endowment funds for resources to the tune of $20-30 million, and people could actually have a say and a vote by using their tokens to decide who, what, where, when, and how we spend that money, that can really give agency and power to a lot of the world's most vulnerable resources that are being exploited and preyed upon by large, powerful groups that are only out for personal gain, right? The tragedy of the commons, as they call it. How do we solve that? And so I just really want to thank everyone for taking the time today. Apologies for the technical difficulties at the start. But you know what? Every single one on this stage is doing something incredible in their space. And we can't wait to, hopefully tell all of your stories as time goes on and elevate the real impact that you guys are creating on the ground. So for everyone else, stay tuned. We'll be starting shortly with our closing ceremony, and we have a wonderful video to be played for you coming up shortly. So thank you everyone for taking the time today. Bye-bye.